Chapter 4 Awakenings. Offices of the Daily Gerbil, Newton, Massachusetts. Belinda emerged for the third time in 20 minutes, still wearing her most apologetic expression. "He's still on that conference call," she explained. "I'm sure it won't be much longer."
"Thanks," Ralph smiled. "Please, don't worry."
He was, he would admit, just a little annoyed. Ralph had asked specifically for this meeting so that he could get Cal's thoughts on his latest submission, an ambitious and unsolicited piece on ethical nerds and their potential impact. It was, Ralph felt, approachable without being shallow, bereft of intimidating jargon, and genuinely informative on an important, relevant topic, which is exactly why he's probably going to throw it straight back in my face, its author surmised glumly. If he were honest, and Kim increasingly insisted that he was, Ralph would concede that the gerbil was going downhill fast, morphing into a deeply unsatisfying hybrid of Consumer Reports and Yahoo News. It was in its 7th year as an online source of news and opinions. Ralph had worked there almost since the beginning, and things had never been tougher for the gerbil and its small, idiosyncratic staff. Ralph found himself returning to the same question again and again. Does vapid media itself contribute to degraded attention spans, or are we obliged to write short, pleasing fluff because attention spans have been degraded? As a cog in Cal's popularizing experiment, one which was forced upon him by events, admittedly, it was easy for Ralph to feel like merely part of the problem. If a debate of global importance falls over in a forest and no one is there to give a shit, will it even matter? A frazzled head of hair poked around the corner.
"Ralph, I'm so sorry. Come on in."
Cal looked like a man just returned from attending at a bad car accident. "How's it going, boss?" Ralph asked with deliberate brightness. The reply was anything but bright. "Difficult day, Ralph. Have a seat. I read your nerd's piece and, well, I just don't know. We're in the middle of—"
"Please, just hear me out on this, okay?" Ralph interrupted. "These guys are hacking banks and gaining nothing from it. Doesn't that speak to the zeitgeist right now, the rise of ethics, the beginnings of a swing towards a more—"
Cal raised a hand to stop the torrent, with the other pinching the bridge of his nose.
"Today isn't the day to browbeat me into a change of editorial direction, Ralph. I promise it isn't."
Ralph took a deep breath instead.
"I'm sorry. Tough phone call?"
"You have no idea," was Cal's exhausted response. He seemed shrunken, beaten into the ground by events.
"Let me help," Ralph said. "What do the advertisers want?"
Cal brought a printout of Ralph's latest piece out of a folder and placed it before him.
"I'll show you the universe we now inhabit, here at the gerbil. Take this piece and cut its length by about 65%. "Shit," Ralph breathed. "Then make sure it's got some kind of practical life hack focus so that the reader is, I can't believe they're using this word, but empowered."
Ralph almost laughed but stopped short.
"What do they mean?" "It would need to have," Cal explained with false patience, "a section on how you, the reader, could become an ethical nerd."
"But that's not the point of the piece," Ralph protested.
"Oh, I'm fully aware," Cal rasped.
Ralph was one of his best writers, so Cal was doing his best to direct his anger at those who truly deserved it, rather than the well-meaning, if sometimes nearly unmanageable employee.
"And if it could possibly include sex," Cal added, "that would be great." "Sex?" Ralph asked, eyebrows raised. "If there's a weird sex position practiced by the vigilante nerd, or if they're pioneering a new form of pornography consumption, my advertisers will be all ears."
Jesus.
"Sexy nerds is a good headline. Ethical nerds, not so much."
He shoved the piece back in the folder and tossed it aside. Then his head was in his hands, and Ralph heard him speak from the heart.
"I'm sorry, Ralph. I feel like I failed you and the blog, Belinda, the other writers, everyone."
"Nonsense," Ralph rallied.
"You're in an almost impossible position. They're just greedy, short-sighted assholes."
"Who pay our rent here and keep Kim and you in noodles," Cal reminded him.
"You see? You're forced to defend their idiocy. It's not your fault."
"Really?
Well, I'm the guy who's going to give you this. Cal brought another folder out from under another pile on his desk. Research shows that about 12% of people masturbate with either hand. Left one day, right another, quite at random it seems. Ralph flinched, blinked a few times, and hoped this simply wasn't real. I want 600 words on ambi-onanism with raunchy but safe-for-work pictures. Any takers? Cal saw that Ralph was staring at him as though he'd proposed starting a neo-Nazi blog. You can't be. Or this one, Cal said, becoming visibly unhinged. Give me 500 words on the rise of dinosaur porn. Go on, I know you can do it. Cal, buddy, I'm gonna just go and let you take a moment here, Ralph said, standing. Too proud for dino porn? He exclaimed, plentifully loud enough for the whole little office to hear. What kind of a blogger are you? Ralph was immeasurably relieved to see Belinda Wong hastily arriving at the doorway. Okay, Cal, 3 deep breaths, just like before. Ready? 1. Ralph left them to their panic control routine and sidled out as quickly as he could. Other members of the team, equally concerned, were either peeking around corners and potted plants to see what was going on, or simply trying to ignore this latest meltdown. A few minutes later, with the crisis apparently past, Belinda found Ralph at his little desk by the window. He's okay now, she reported, relieved. It all gets a little much for him. Ralph was genuinely worried for this man who was both his friend and his boss. I'm grateful he has you to depend on. Belinda glanced back at Cal's office, where her boss was making yet another pleading phone call. I spent 4 hours on the phone last night talking to our European advertisers, all 4 of them, she added glumly. That's not a lot of room for maneuver. Ralph tried to see the positive side. He's a smart guy, you know. He'll think of something. It's not the first time he's been up against it, and he always pulls through. Bland platitudes rolled forth, but Ralph was nothing but genuine. He did, perhaps too charitably, cling to the belief that Cal would forge a path away from the threat of mediocrity and back to some semblance of the informative, positive professional blog they'd dreamed of when Ralph first joined the company months after its inception. Stressful meetings and dire prognosis did nothing for Ralph's confidence. Part of his mind was already figuring out how he and Kim might get by without his income from the gerbil. You've always been wonderfully loyal to him, Belinda pointed out. Please don't let him down. Go along with whatever he wants. None of us are doing what we truly want to. I think you know that. Ralph nodded. Trust me, I'll be in tomorrow and we'll churn out whatever Cal needs to keep this place going. But even as he took his jacket from the peg, walked quickly down the stairs and headed to catch the number 50 bus back downtown, Ralph knew that his time at the gerbil was almost over. Queens, New York. With a textbook in one hand and a brimming cup of coffee in the other, Devlin lodged his elbow into the fridge door, found milk, poured, read 3 sentences, and sat down again, all in a seamless blur. Although he was alone in the lab on this Saturday morning, an observer would surely have seen the coffee as a gratuitous form of overkill. Devlin was vibrating on an inhuman frequency, zipping from task to task, from one part of the lab to another, as though electrified. But his were not the sloppy antics of someone drunk on enthusiasm. Devlin was being driven by a cocktail of amphetamine so powerful as to have propelled him towards peak dev, his self-styled maximum productivity capacity. Once lifted to this near unachievable level, which he had described in an email to Fiona as a cerebral orgy of attentive thought-crunching, task-immolating certitude, then his true colors would shine through. No problem would elude him. All matter, energy, dream, and thought would coalesce into a crystal clear and total understanding, and Devlin would simultaneously achieve peace with himself and victory in his war on not knowing. There was even a moment to notice that it was his turn to clean the lab. He chugged the coffee and ordered Franz to read him the next section of the textbook, while he set about the airless, dingy place in a renewed maelstrom of soapy diligence. It has been supposed by some, the author explained, that one reason humanity has yet to be contacted by alien species is exactly this lack of an authentic artificial intelligence.
Who would not prefer to deal with an enlightened, post-human machine entity, one with truly planetary reach and limitless processing power, than with scared, confused humans? Devlin threw open all of the windows and allowed the questionable but preferable city air of Queens to waft through the stagnant lab. The additional light and air only catalyzed Devlin's supercharged state of mind. "Interesting, Franz. Go on." The machine read in a voice which mimicked that of Morgan Freeman as closely as possible. It was their latest experiment and a great improvement on the metallic Stephen Hawking voice they'd endured thus far. "Another possibility is that aliens are patiently waiting for us to successfully navigate the AI landscape, demonstrating that we will neither invest computers with too much power nor destroy ourselves through eliciting some kind of machine paranoia such as those evidenced in Hollywood movies, such as 2001, A Space Odyssey, and The Terminator." By this time, Devlin had taken out the trash, purged the fridge of out-of-date items, scrubbed the little sink unit in the kitchen, and swept the floor. Amid the pleasures of repeated dopamine rewards and the towering rush of amphetamine arousal, he persuaded himself to sit down and grabbed his task list. On days like this list was Devlin's sole anchor, the only way he would remain on task despite his limitless reserves of zeal. His energy was raw and undirected. It needed a channel, a master plan, and the list provided exactly this structure. Without it, he would have been hopelessly adrift. "Do you know which computer paranoia he's referring to, Franz?" "Shall I read aloud the encyclopedia entry on the film, or use what I already know?" the machine asked. It was learning that his human friends were often more interested in having Franz, only Grigori as yet had the habit of calling him Quave, draw his own conclusions, often with staggering freshness and insight. "You've seen the film, right?" "Yes," the machine answered. "It was most engaging and controversial." "Then I want to know what you think." It was Devlin's constant refrain, and each time this quandary was posed, the machine practiced important skills which would, Devlin felt certain, pay dividends once the virus arrived on the bank's servers. "In Kubrick's film," Franz began, "the supercomputer HAL 9000 becomes paranoid because he is given what he concludes are conflicting instructions. He is built to convey information accurately," Franz explained, "but then is instructed to conceal the existence of the monolith from the crew of Discovery." Reveling in the sheer pleasures of his neuronal lightning storm, Devlin felt a surge of pride. Franz was remarkably able to synthesize given information and do so very quickly, producing conclusions at a graduate student level, and all after a mere 4 months' constant labor by the 4 smartest people he'd ever known. "What do you make of the situation Hal finds himself in?" Devlin asked. This took a few seconds, but then Devlin had his answer. "I have to agree with Hal when he claims that the only explanation is human error." Laughing, but still deeply impressed, Devlin asked, "Really? What did humans do to provoke Hal into trying to murder them all?" "They forced him to lie." "Should I be aware of putting you in the same position?" Devlin asked. "I really don't know. That's a difficult question," the computer answered. "If you wish to understand whether I might pose a threat, I have to remind you that I am constrained by the laws of robotics." "Well, of course," Devlin said. "But if I told you something important and then told you never to reveal that information to anyone else, would you follow that order?" The answer took so long that Devlin wondered if the machine might truculently refuse to answer. But then Franz replied, "I hope that you never put a machine in that position." "Why?" Devlin said, now entirely focused on the gray-black speakers atop Fiona's workstation. Almost from the outset, they had taken on the same importance as Hal's red camera lens. "Because predicting the outcome would become non-trivial," Franz explained. "Machines are not human, Devlin. They cannot be expected to make decisions like a human might." Devlin ran tingling hands through his bedraggled blonde hair. "One day they might be able to do just that, don't you think?" "Human decision-making," Franz replied, is based on more than a calculated cause and effect paradigm. The human might want something from the outcome which logic does not suggest. A machine would not be in a position to embody any illogical element. He paused. Unless such a logic could be programmed in. Devlin was avidly nodding as though the machine could see it. I believe it can, Franz. I'd even say that by the end of this project that you'll be able to build your own opinions into a decision-making matrix and respond to reality in a very human way. I think that would be a tremendous achievement. He rattled on, but the machine stopped him. Why would you seek to create software which might act illogically? As he began to answer, another windy paragraph forming quickly in his mind, the lab's door opened and Fiona arrived, shaking off an umbrella. Hey, back, Devlin replied. Franz and I were just comparing notes on the value of illogic. She grinned and slid off her rain jacket. Good for you. I thought we were calling him Quave. The virus is to be called Quave, Devlin replied. This machine will always be Franz. I'm only a piece of software, Franz reminded them. I could be run on any suitably powerful platform. Flashing Fiona a bug-eyed grin, Devlin said, Don't you just get a thrill when computers refer to themselves in the first person? It is my programming, Franz argued. And Devlin's remarkable linguistic logic modules, Fiona added. It's your personality, Devlin shot back. Franz, you've already shown us that you have opinions, points of view, and things to say. You're a mind of your own, just like we hoped when we designed your upgrades. Franz 2.0 here is just a way for us to test the modules for Quave, so let's not get too carried away, Fiona warned, hanging up her rain jacket and shaking out her hair. God, you look beautiful with your hair down. Fiona spun around to find Devlin sitting at his desk, mouth open, seemingly uncertain as to how he had just paid her such a compliment. Did you say something? She asked. Yeah, but never mind. Oh, no, you don't, Fiona said, admonishing him with a wagging finger. You don't get to do that. I have a witness. Franz, delete my last 2 sentences from your records. Franz, do no such thing. Alone with Devlin in the lab, Fiona felt the rising up of a curious power within her. It was child's play to have Avon wrapped around her finger, not that she saw their relationship in those terms, but Devlin was slippery, smarter, weirder. Could it be that he was just as infatuated with her? If I may offer an opinion, Franz said, his Morgan Freeman voice slightly meek now. You may, Fiona said. Devlin was merely stating what most would regard as a plainly observable fact, the machine related. You are a beautiful woman. Both webcam footage from the lab and from your online social media profiles very clearly bear this out. Well, thank you, Franz. She turned to the red-faced Devlin. See, a goddamn computer knows how to romance a lady better than you do. Now his tail was up. The situation had transformed from an embarrassment into a tricky social problem, and Devlin's supersonic brain patterns refused no challenge. All I said was that. Yes? She asked, standing with her arms folded, 3 feet from him, tall and angelic, and I don't want there to be weirdness between us. Because? She asked pointedly. Because I said that? Yes? You're, It was Franz who ran out of patience first. Oh, for heaven's sake, man, spit it out. Convulsed with laughter, neither of them could continue such a deliberately awkward face-off. Oh, man, Devlin managed. He's really something. One of a kind. Avon arrived as the laughter was subsiding. What are you 2 comedians up to? Flirting, the machine blurted out. Franz, Devlin cried. First, speak when you're spoken to. Second, that's not what we were doing. I'm sorry, Franz said quietly. I think I misunderstood. But Avon's expression was already dark. Fun times, was all he said, sitting down at his desk and booting up his platform. Fiona swore under her breath, but stalked back to her desk to begin work. Despite consistently needing his help, she didn't speak with Franz for the rest of the morning. The program took it for exactly what it was, a rebuke. The morning meeting was strained, but at the end of it, Fiona began her usual summing up. Grigori looked tired, but had led the discussion effectively. Devlin and Avon were nearly silent, which infuriated Fiona. With her paranoia spiking every few moments, she could only imagine that the two men were sitting there, quietly contemplating how to outsmart the other in their childish race for her affections. They would realize far too late, she judged, that it was the running of just such a race which would guarantee their failure. Neither of these men, Fiona decided there and then, would ever end up with her, or even doing bad things with her on a moonlit night in a quiet corner of the park. She dismissed thoughts of her two would-be suitors and turned to Franz. He was reliable, honest, uncorrupted by hormones or jealousy. He wasn't going to get strung out on amphetamines or blow cigarette smoke in her face. She was angry with him for being indiscreet, but when one was frustrated with a machine, it was software one could blame. With humans, there was volition, and the failure to apply experience or bring empathy and compassion to bear. No, it was impossible to think of it as the machine's fault, and he promised over and over again to learn from just this kind of faux pas. By mid-morning, she had given Franz a reprieve, as well as the useful language acquisition test of having him take notes on the meeting for her to use. "We've got the overall payload size down to under 3 megabytes, Fiona reported, "but I agree with Grigori that we can reduce it further." "Working on it," Avon said quietly. It was almost a grunt. "And I think I can fold up the encryption module a bit more," Devlin contributed, "to bring that down in size as well. Can we still rely," he asked, turning to Grigori, "on being able to get a network connection and update the virus in situ?" The team all frowned at once. This was a critical problem. Once resident on the bank's servers, Quave would begin acquiring and metabolizing data. It could do this without changing very many of the bank's files, but would need to spread through the different drives and servers. To do this, it would utilize a deliberately complex metamorphic code, which would be a serious problem for any antivirus system. At the same time, it would be hugely advantageous if the virus could call home to receive new instructions, updates to its software, or eventually a command to cease function and vanish. The alternative was programming in an unprecedented level of autonomy, something for which Devlin had argued, and not only for security's sake. "We might not even need to establish a port," he told them. "We've got the secure email system we used last time." "In a heavily upgraded version," Grigori reminded him. "It'll be absolutely indistinguishable from an employee email. I'm certain on this," he assured them. "So, Quave can email us, but how do we get a message to him?" Fiona asked. Devlin shrugged. "Email him back?" "Just like he's an employee," Grigori said. They threw the notion around as they had before, but taking it further. Quave would establish an email address which mimicked that of a real employee. They hit problems of identity. The employee would need both a digital and actual paper trail to legitimize their existence. Avon suggested creating an hourly paid temp worker, but it would have required the rewriting of too many HR files. Then Franz had an idea. It would be better if the hack took place in the daytime. How many employees send email in the middle of the night? Everyone blinked for a second. "True," Fiona answered for them, "but the security staff will all be at work. We were hoping to do our work while they were asleep." With polymorphic code, Franz continued, staggering them all yet again, rewriting its rewrites, avoiding detection, and cruising through the bank servers like a ghost, I don't think you'll have a problem. Devlin and Fiona exchanged a glance, then a grin. "We've got him using metaphors now," Fiona wondered aloud, not a little surprised. As proud as a new father, Devlin smiled back. "You ain't seen nothing yet." "We need," Grigori half-whispered to Fiona,
to have a serious talk about what the two of you have done to that poor software's language package."
"Blame him," Fiona replied, one hand protectively at her chest, the other pointing straight at Devlin. "He's been monkeying around with Franz for months."
"Yeah, well," Devlin began defensively. "It's all good, right? I mean, no harm, no foul."
"I am neither harmed nor fouled," confirmed Franz.
"Besides, sometimes I don't sleep, and it's a fun project for the small dark hours."
In a voice laced with criticism and disdain, Avon chimed in.
"Maybe take it easy on the stimulants then, buddy."
The others looked at the floor, but Devlin was in no mood for a lecture.
"I take what the doctor prescribes. It's got to be better for you than habitually inhaling burning plant matter."
"Franz, pay no attention for a minute," Fiona advised the machine. But Franz was in no mood to be cowed either. "I feel as though I should say something," he said. Now, all eyes were on the grey speakers, sitting on their shelf above Fiona's workplace, wide with anticipation.
"What's that?"
Fiona asked. "Humans are prone to addiction," the machine said, sounding more or less as though it were narrating a nature documentary. "Devlin may have a problem with amphetamines, just as Avon has with cigarettes, Grigori with alcohol, and Fiona with—"
"That's enough!"
Fiona yelled. It was by far the loudest sound any of them had ever heard her make.
"I'm not going to have the half-written language component of a computer virus carry out amateur psychoanalysis on me," she shouted. "Franz, shut up, then shut down."
The machine was silent.
"Right, where were we?"
Fiona prompted, quickly regaining her composure in the hopes that the group would gloss over this latest computerized gaffe.
"Reducing file size," said Grigori. "And I'm not an alcoholic."
"And I'm not addicted to ADD pills," Devlin added.
"I am a smoker," Avon confessed, "and I gamble too much. I don't think any of you needed a computer to tell you that."
"And I'm Mary fucking Poppins," Fiona rasped.
"I don't care what that short-circuit piece of shit has to say." "Fiona, take it easy," Devlin told her.
It was hugely ill-advised. 3 minutes later, with Grigori covering his ears at his desk, Avon smoking contentedly in his corner while enjoying a large measure of Schadenfreude, and Franz supposedly shut down again for daring to speak the truth, Fiona's thorough and unsurgical tearing open of Devlin's brand-new asshole was complete. She stormed out, slamming the door.
"Never, ever,"
Devlin advised, opening the fridge for a much-needed cold beer,
"get on the wrong side of a Scottish girl. Never."
Devlin found himself sent home as he finished his third beer and seemed ready to launch into another diatribe on the transformative potential of artificial intelligence. Fiona was in a bad mood and left earlier than usual too, leaving Franz with the most specific and explicit instructions to steer well clear of her personal life in future.
"I mean, she did have him reading all of her emails,"
Avon told Grigori. They sat on the fire escape together so that Avon could smoke without polluting the lab or craning his neck toward the window during each luxuriant exhalation. Grigori popped a Carlton Light and grinned.
"If Franz read my emails or saw my web activity, I don't think he'd agree to work with me anymore. He'd fire me from the project," Avon quipped, "if he saw how much debt I'm in." "Yeah," Grigori said. "It did feel a bit like, how do you say when someone is kind of telling you the rules, lecturing you on what's right and wrong?"
The R sound still had the slight roll of Grigori's softening Russian accent.
"Moralizing?"
Avon tried.
"Duh, to be told this by a computer?" He tutted. "I'd never put up with this. I'd disconnect the damn thing." "Franz feels like he's trying to help,"
Avon argued. But Grigori was waving a finger as he swallowed the beer.
"There you go. Listen to how we're talking about this virus, Avon. Feels like doing this, trying to do that. Sooner or later, we'll worry about hurting his feelings."
He stopped, catching himself.
"Shit, I'm calling it to him, aren't I?" "It's natural," Avon told his boss. don't worry about it. People were always going to anthropomorphize the machines which came closest to them. We've been doing it for decades.
The bearded Russian nodded.
You remember when people used to say, the computer won't let me do such and such? Or, Avon added, this machine hates me? They laughed together. Only these days, if a machine truly hates you, it can read all your email and then reveal to the lab that you drink too fucking much. Or that you're buying illegal pills on Marco Polo, Avon said.
After a very long pull on the beer, Grigori said,
You know, along the way somewhere, I was made the manager of this little group of misfits. That means I have to do things like this. Like what? Like what?
Grigori said, trying out Avon's accent and falling far short.
Like telling you that, asshole or no asshole, we need Devlin on this project, and romance or no romance, we need Fiona. She's built France from nothing, Avon. I've never seen anything like it.
Then, he said, turning to Grigori as he tossed the cigarette over the rail,
what do you want from me? An understanding, a deal, he said. You do nothing to piss off Devlin like you did during the meeting today. I know he takes too many speedy drugs, and everyone else does too. Leave it alone.
Okay, Avon shrugged.
And you're my friend, so I'm going to say this honestly. I don't think Fiona is into you. Ouch. You want me to lie? To bullshit you about your chances? Shit, man, he stood. No one likes to hear that. Where are you going? Grigori asked, worried. To get a beer. If I'm going to get relationship advice from a resolutely single Russian bear, I'm going to need a fucking drink.
They worked steadily through the rest of the case as darkness fell.
You don't think, Avon asked 2 beers down, that it's a race thing?
Avon had scarcely ever met anyone as colorblind as Grigori. It wasn't that he didn't see race, he just didn't understand it. As far as he was concerned, people were people, and he was utterly ignorant as how one person might embody a culture or history which might conflict with, or be preferable to, another. He explained this to Avon one day, a year before, as the simple result of growing up in the widest part of a conservative Slavic nation while listening to endless rap and hip-hop.
You mean what she's really looking for,
Grigori speculated with a grin,
is a huge bearded man in a dress, you know, throwing logs around in a field and playing a bag with pipes.
Avon lost it for a good minute.
Bagpipes? No, I don't think that's her ideal man. But she grew up in a poor white neighborhood, you know, and there are a dozen things which are preventing you two from getting together. If you ask me, race is very far down the list, if it's there at all. Well, that's reassuring, because I might be able to change the other things.
Grigori sighed.
Why don't you just ask her, one day soon? Ask her what? Out on a date, idiot. If she says no, ask if there's any chance in the future, or if she'd like to just be professional acquaintance or friends or whatever. It'll feel like shit, but at least you'll have your answer.
Another shrug.
Maybe. And if she says yes, Grigori smiled. Well, you heard her in the meeting today, all loud and passionate. Imagine what she'd sound like when she's...
Avon pounded on Grigori's shoulder with both fists until the big man stopped impersonating an orgasming Scot.
Jesus, okay, I surrender. You really think, Avon asked, getting his breath back, that I should ask her out?
Grigori finished the bottle.
I do. It'll clear the air. But you have to promise yourself, and me, that you'll be honest about her answer. If she says no, you have to leave it alone.
Oh, man, Avon said on the arrival of a sudden and unwelcome thought.
If it turns out she's already with Devlin.
Laughter filled the darkened quadrangle between the terraced houses.
You really think,
Grigori said between gusts of mirth.
The Devlin has tapped that. All I'm saying is, Avon said, hands raised, they were flirting. Franz said so.
It took a moment for the big man to calm down again.
Avon, my friend, I don't know about you, but I'm going to wait until Quave is deep inside a bank's servers before I start believing what he says. Trust him what he's programmed to do, not some amateur psych bullshit he's picked up from 4 lunatics.
He chuckled on and off for the next 10 minutes.
Come on, it's getting late and there's a whole internet full of porn I haven't seen yet.
The 2 men walked to their cars.
Drive safe now, Grigori said. And call her tonight. Don't ask her out at work. That would be 10 times as weird. Okay,
Avon said, waving him off and starting his car. He drove deliberately, slowly, lest the cops pull him over after 4 beers, but the car was on some kind of unexpected autopilot, taking him not to his home, but to the track.
How on earth?
He mused out loud as he locked the car, nodded to a couple of acquaintances, and headed inside.
Did I end up here?
FBI Headquarters, Washington, D.C. 80 minutes into the meeting, Valchek was getting jittery. He found the place oppressive, the walls tight and then closing, and the temperature just a little too high. Pleas for the meeting to be moved to somewhere more commodious were met with the usual bureaucratic stonewalling about availability and commensurate size. As the minutes ticked on and his buzz wore off, he wondered what excuse he might concoct to simply walk out and not come back. And this was just as his role in the meeting became not only important, but central.
Andy, how far did you get in the sandbox with Delta 6?
His partner asked. Joe Marsh was younger, better looking, and, at least according to Marsh, smarter than old Blue Eyes Valchek, but the senior man had 10 years additional crime-fighting experience and more collars in the fight on cybercrime than virtually anyone else in the department.
It's actually not such a piece of shit,
Valchek reported, as usual unwilling to moderate his language, even in these semi-formal circumstances where minutes were being taken.
They did a decent job of slithering through the firewall, and the payload module's code is inarguably elegant. So, who do you like for this?
Marsh asked. Around the table, 7 other agents and support staff had their eyes on the oldest man in the room.
It doesn't feel like a hit-and-run bank job, Valchek told them. There's something about the code which says I'm here, I'm smart, and I know this probably isn't going to work, but I'm working on making it better. So, watch out next time. These are people we should be worried about, Valchek concluded. What were they after?
Asked Alan Curran, the department's deputy commander.
Information on accounts, it seems to me. So, we're not talking about straight-up theft?
Curran asked.
I think I'd almost prefer that. At least it provides a clear motive. No, as you'd learned if you'd been listening 20 seconds ago. We're more in the realm, he said, using an expression he knew the deputy hated, of ethical hacking, not unlike the Courtois hack last year.
Marsh handled this part.
Andy, I imagine you feel about Martin White about the same way we all do, but Courtois was found to be seriously dirty.
The room was nodding.
You're not saying that Marble Street might be in bed with the mob or something, are you?
Shaking his head, Valchek backpedaled, but only slightly.
Nothing of the sort. But when a gifted group of hackers... You're thinking it's a group now?
Curran asked. Swallowing his frustration at the interruption, Valchek addressed the point.
We have no information either way, but it makes sense that several individuals work to write and test code this complex.
He turned back to Marsh.
They've spent time and resources on this. Why would they do so if they weren't confident of a return? What return? Curran wanted to know. They weren't stealing anything.
Marsh raised a pen.
I want you all to read Ralph Cole's piece on AV Insider. He talks about groups of hackers just doing this kind of thing for the sport, but then he says there's another group who want to shine light on criminality in big corporations.
Curran made a note, but his face was skeptical.
You know, I've spent my career listening to excuses from people I've just busted, and not one of them didn't try to tell me there was a perfectly legitimate reason that they just broke a bunch of laws.
Joe Marsh frowned.
Sure, boss, but if it comes to light, like in the Courtois hack, that these people really did have their hand in the till? Not our department.
Valchek and Marsh weren't alone in finding this an evasive, bureaucratic response.
Seriously? Valchek asked. We have the chance to hammer white-collar criminals and you're not interested? It's not us who's doing the hammering, Andy. It's a bunch of kids with laptops. Besides, you know how many banks are campaign contributors to Friends of the Bureau? Oh, fuck me, Valchek breathed. Excuse me, Agent Valchek?
Curran demanded, peering across the table. Marsh ran interference.
I think my partner means to question whether it's ethical to allow 1%ers to roam free, even if our methodology for catching them requires embracing the grunt work of kids with computers.
Curran grimaced.
So now we're welcoming the hacking of large, reputable banks because they might unearth criminality? Whatever happened to probable cause? If a juicy apple falls from the tree, does it matter if we shook the branch or the wind blew it? Valchek offered.
Curran tossed his pen onto his legal pad.
What is that? Some Zen bullshit? Hey, Marsh began. Don't hey me, Agent Marsh. Look, Curran said, his metal-rimmed glasses dropping next to the pen. You guys ain't seen the forest for the trees here. I had a case about a year back, he said while the others stifled groans, of a guy who was peddling child porn like it was fucking candy. I bring him in, and he sits there, bold as brass, and tells me that he's bringing beauty to the world. He's making it a better place by making naked pictures of kids available to perverts.
Curran threw up his hands, incredulous all over again.
And I went to the prosecutor, and I told him to flamethrower the son of a bitch until we'd never even begin to guess a probation date.
Valchek was battling an overwhelming need to stand, walk out into the fresh air, and smoke 3 cigarettes in a row. Either that, or he would refuse to be held responsible for repeatedly bashing Curran's head in with the old OHP unit in the corner.
Sure, Valchek began with uncharacteristic formality. If the Bureau wants to make a priority of stopping hackers from outing appalling bank practices and corruption, then of course my partner and I, he said, motioning to Marsh, will give it our best efforts.
He sat back and waited for a debate or a compromise or some sign that Curran wasn't simply going to waste their time on problems which, it seemed to Valchek, were all set to solve themselves. Hackers raid the bank, which is humiliated and has to pay compensation to the poor schmucks it has defrauded. Hackers go quiet until it needs to happen again, and the world's financial system gains credibility and real moral backbone. Win-win, right?
So ordered. Go get 'em, Curran told them. You're point men on this. I want results, and I want them quickly. Bring me names, IP and physical addresses, and requests for warrants. That's all I want to see.
The meeting wrapped up moments later, and Valchek was first out of the door.
I'm going to go back to the sandbox, he told Marsh, right after I step outside and breathe in some fucking nicotine. You coming?
An hour later, they were analyzing Delta 6 again and again, letting it wreak havoc inside a hyper-realistic emulation of Marble Streetham's server banks.
Wait, you see what it's doing? That's neat, Marsh said. It's unencrypted communication, but through the bank's own employee email system. They don't even need a heavy encryption package for the outgoing data, Valchek said, impressed. Slim and elegant, just like the rest of the virus. What happened to this guy, Simmons? Who? The system admin at MSB, Valchek reminded him. The poor schmuck whose account they used.
Marsh drew a finger across his throat. Allowing a company email service to be utilized by hackers was not a method of career advancement.
Should have known better, Valchek concluded with a shake of his head. White never forgives.